The views presented in this program are not meant to express the specific views of the Aletheia Bible Fellowship. You are listening to the Vigilance Radio Network.
Hey, testing, 1, 2, 3. There we are. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to our show. Welcome back to the Culture and Sanity podcast. This is episode number 5. Episode number 5 of season 4. So, thanks for joining us. We have, as always, Pastor Monty with us. And today we have another guest, and this is Dan. Dan, how do you pronounce your last name, Dan?
Hughes.
Dan Hughes from Zion, downtown Portland. Dan and Aletheia have been, or Dan's church and Aletheia have been partnered for the last couple of years now. Dan was in the rotating crew for our cross-examination panel discussion. So you might have seen him there, but yeah, he's joining us on our podcast this morning. It's the first time we've seen Dan in like a year because of COVID, just like it was the first time we saw David last time. So we're happy to have Dan here. Checking out the new studio. We built this studio during the pandemic.
Looks great.
Yeah, well, it's a widow's mite, you know.
In fact, I want to take a picture of it so
Yeah.
that it inspires.
David also took notes of it. He's like, even just something simple as the technology you're using. I would like to know like what you guys. Anyways, so yeah, we've been busy during the pandemic, Dan. But yeah, we're happy to have Dan here, and we're happy to be back. So I guess let's just get right into it. Our producer might have sort of previewed what we're talking about today, but today we're going to be talking about a few things. One of them sort of in line with what we're talking about at church, at Aletheia right now, Pastor Monty, with the sermon arc that we're on as far as how we can be discerning of like media, you know, and specifically right now, Dan, our month is geared toward movies and television, and how as believers we can sort of navigate that world and, you know, protect our minds and this kind of thing. And so one of the topics is sort of going to be orbiting around that general idea, is just understanding the believer's role, or the church's role, in media and, you know, cultural production, and how we can, you know, be useful and beneficial in that sort of battlefield, because there's some I'd call them celebrities, but the truth is I don't know that they are celebrities. There's some like D-listers. So we're gonna be talking about that. We'll get into it in a second here, and then we have some unlikely sort of supporters of the faith in someone like Gene Simmons and Alice Cooper. And then, you know, Disney gets into the news again for different things that Disney is doing. They seem to be at the forefront of that, sort of pioneering or trailblazing, you know, wokeness.
Oh, they have been for years.
Yeah, and they will continue to be, it seems like. So yeah, we got a few things on the docket. I hope we can get to a few things, but as I was telling Dan, and as Pastor Monty knows, hey, 1 hour is 1 hour, and it's 60 minutes and 60 seconds in a minute, so we'll do what we can with it. So let's get into it. So as I said, certain celebrities, quote unquote, have made their way into the headlines in the last week, 2 weeks or so, as we're you know, pulling from headlines and news, because that's what we do. And when I say celebrities, I don't mean that. Kevin Sorbo. You familiar with Kevin Sorbo? Hercules. You know Kevin Sorbo?
Come on, he's a celebrity.
Oh, come on. That's loosely.
In his own right.
Sure, he's a relative celebrity. I'm a relative celebrity. So anyways, he was in the news recently, and as well as this other guy, you're not going to know him by name. He's a character actor and many different things, but they're both sort of touching on the same thing. And so we'll approach each article and sort of ask questions pertaining to it, but they're both sort of orbiting around the same idea. So first of all, I think Jasmine, our producer, will post the article for the watcher if you want to, you know, have it up while we're talking about it. But essentially, the suggestion is that the church isn't doing enough to support this field of ministry, meaning, you know, like movies and television. He was talking about how his experience as an actor, and specifically I don't know if you've traced his career or been tracking him diligently, Kevin Sorbo, since Hercules, but he appears in a lot of like faith-based media, movies. He was in this God is Not Dead, which was a low-budget, Christian movie that went on to make, like over $100 million. So it was hugely successful in that regard. We'll leave that at that. And then he's most recently like narrating this documentary regarding like Revelation, the book of Revelation, and the rapture and what this all means, and so on and so forth. So he's in an interview, and he's promoting this documentary that he's a part of, that he's narrating, and he's telling the interviewer his experience since he's been involved in these types of movies and TV shows. Is he gets a lot of feedback or input from different pastors of different churches or different people on the street saying, you need to do more of these things. Like, why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you doing more? And like they're sort of putting the onus on him to do more for the faith as an actor. And his response to them is that, well, the truth is, the church needs to be doing more. The church needs to do more to, fund this ministry that I'm taking a part in. And the truth is, I'm working on a $3 million movie, and that's the food budget for Avengers. Any sort of cheeky response like that, which is hilarious and disgusting at the same time. He fires back with like, I don't think the church is doing enough. Why is it that I'm operating in a niche part of this industry, this faith-based films and movies and stuff. Why isn't the church doing more to give a higher quality of product? Because the truth is, and I don't know if you guys have watched much or you consume that kind of media, but it's terrible. Like, Christian TV shows and movies is generally it's bad writing, like cliched characters. It's kind of hitting you over the head with the message and the theme, and the writing is bad. The production value is low. Like it's not on a higher level. And I don't think you're ever going to get an Avengers budget for a faith-based anything. I don't think that's realistic. But his point is we're not fighting with the same tools is sort of what he's getting at, and we don't have the same pull and this and that. So before I keep talking, I want to open it up to your guys' initial thoughts, and we can sort of get into a more targeted question. But what are your guys' initial thoughts on where Kevin Sorbo is coming from?
Man, you're tough.
I don't know. Do you think he has a point?
Well,
do you think he has rose-colored glasses? Do you think we should even be investing, like quite literally investing in this market to produce something meaningful and useful for people? Well, again, we're going to get into the specifics of that, but
I think one of the things that there is certainly a drop off sometimes with Christian films, like Christian art, if you will.
Sure.
And a lot of it has to do with acting quality. And visual quality of the film, script quality. That's the low-hanging, easy thing to hit. The low-hanging fruit. But
it's so terrible.
But seriously, like there's this recent series called The Chosen that's out, for example, and they run on a limited budget. I think it was $4 million to fund, or like $1 million an episode or something like that. And it's very well done. I mean, they have great sets. The visual quality is excellent. The script is good, and the acting is also on par with other things. And I think that what we need is more visionaries who are willing to say that there's a certain level I'm willing to go, but if the art is at a certain level, I'm not going to produce it simply because it's for other Christians or easy to access for other people. And I think we're limited in that front. Now there's some films that kind of went under the radar that I think are quite interesting, like Believe Me, for example. Have you guys seen Believe Me?
Went under my radar.
Okay, yeah. So it was directed and written by this guy named Will Bakke.
Okay.
And it's about this guy who, like, I don't know, some of it's a little cliche, but he can't fund his last semester of college.
Okay.
And so he goes to church with these friends who happen to be churchgoers, and he sees these missionaries who went on a mission trip to Hawaii, and they were raising funds, and they were able to raise $3,000 from offerings alone. Mm-hmm. And he said, "What kind of accountability do you guys have for this mission?" And she's like, "Excuse me, accountability?" it's a mission, you know. And so a light bulb goes off in his brain that he's going to create this fake organization and this fake mission trip to raise funds, claiming that they're building wells in Lesotho. And they end up taking this journey, like they get picked up by this traveling evangelistic group, and they end up taking this journey where, you know, they end up in pretending to be Christians, they end up finding God in the process. And it's actually really well done. There's really great acting. It's and I guarantee he didn't have the substantial budget to pull this off, but it was really well done. And part of it too was Christians making fun of themselves, which I think we need more of.
Being honest.
Being authentic. Some authenticity. Like if we create films that say everything we do is great, everything evangelicals do is great, that's not being very honest.
And it like I was alluding to, like a lot of the times with that type of art, you know, faith-based art, it's very rose-colored, you know, like it's hit you over the head, and it's not taking into account the human nature and the nuances of life and these things. Like you're saying, maybe what made it good is this. It almost was poking fun at itself, and in the process, you know, and these characters in the process, they actually did find, you know, their relationship with God. But yeah, a lot of the times those movies, like what's the channel that generally is it? Hallmark is generally like...
Oh, that's a chick flick channel.
That's a chick flick channel, yeah.
So it's not Hallmark. Am I thinking of a different channel? Okay, I don't know.
You're thinking maybe, I don't know, TBN?
I can tell what you've been watching.
I don't. I don't, trust me. My mom does. But anyways, yeah, a lot of the times it's just so bad, you know? Like, I don't know. What do you think, Pastor?
You know, first and foremost, taking it out of the realm of the nuance of Christian filmmaking, first and foremost, it is a business. And the reality of it is filmmaking is all about business. And you're not going to get people to want to invest their money. And that's how films are made, by the way, is by going out and getting people who are going to want to drop cash into a project. And they look at that and say, is this a wise investment? Am I investing my money so that I'm going to get a return on that capital that I invest? And will this film produce money? So I think when people pitch these projects that they're doing in regard to Christian filmmaking, they don't approach it from that standpoint. They approach it from the standpoint of, you know, we're believers, or we're trying to put forth a message, and you know we want this to glorify God and be used as a vehicle, and that's not a message that investors want to hear.
Yeah, it's hard. It's a hard sell.
Investors want to hear, you know, you want $1 million of my cash? Well, you know, what's the return going to be?
Right.
And so that's. First and foremost, that is an issue that I see that is here, because believers who are endeavoring to enter into this form, if you will, this form of evangelism, are not talking the right language.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just it's a hard sell, you're saying. It's a hard sell to go.
It can be a hard sell. I mean, you need somebody. What you need is, you know, the Lord to raise up somebody who has the gift of gab and has the touch to be able to get investors to invest in the projects that are there. And then once you talk about actor quality. Well, you know, good actors cost money.
They cost money, yeah.
You know, now Kevin's doing this as a ministry. So he's a good actor, but he's doing this as a ministry. So he, you know, doesn't take the kind of money that he would normally take if he were an actor saying...
For the record, I don't actually know if he's a good actor.
He's a good actor.
Is he a good actor?
Oh, come on. Hercules, are you kidding me? And that's great stuff right
he's
there.
All right.
Seems tongue in cheek, but keep going.
My point being that if you want to get great actors to work that script that you feel is dynamite, you got to have the cash.
So John,
That's a good point. I mean, like business-wise, you do have to get good actors. You have to be willing to pay for good actors.
Yeah.
But I'm curious how, like, Dallas Jenkins, the director of Chosen, has found all of these actors who are really excellent, and they're on a limited budget. Like, you can do it.
I'm guessing
like,
they're all obscure.
like, I think so too.
actors.
But
Like, I
he's
doubt there's
obviously
anyone
got some savvy and some connections.
Yeah,
to
and
make this happen.
that's producers. That's what producers do. They they go out and they make connections and they're able to do that. But I think first and foremost, the biggest issue that these venues face is that they do not treat it as wanting it to be a successful business enterprise.
So a few comments from the listeners.
Sure.
John Parker says, "Is a blockbuster going to win people to Christ?" And I don't know if John is asking the question in response to, like, what if we did produce a faith-based blockbuster? And like, I don't know if he's asking the question, is that going to necessarily win people to Christ? I'm not sure, John, where your exact angle is in your question, but we hear your question. Lucy Brown and Josh both point out, huge movies, hugely impactful cultural movies. The Ten Commandments, Chariots of Fire, Ben-Hur, Passion of the Christ. Like, it is possible to make a faith-based movie and be good and culturally impactful with the right
Because they had the
tools.
budget. I mean, Cecil B. DeMille. They had the right budget to.
So
be
maybe
able
that
to
brings
do
up a
what they
different
wanted
question.
to.
So a lot of those movies, especially the ones that Lucy mentioned, first of all, Lucy might be of an older generation, I'm guessing.
Okay.
But
I can
is
neither
that-
confirm
is-
nor deny.
is that indicative of a different time then than now? Like,
Oh, yeah.
why were movies getting why was Charlton Heston, involved in this big movie? And why don't we see, who's at the top of their game now? I don't know. Chris Pratt's a bad example. Chris Pratt's like an outspoken Christian. I'm just thinking of people who are on the top.
Yeah, I don't know, like
Leonardo DiCaprio. or
Tom Cruise or something. I
Yeah,
don't know,
Tom Cruise. Well, that's a bad example too.
Yeah,
He's a
I know, I know.
Scientologist. Man, it's hard to find just a quick example. But why aren't these big time actors, involved in these big time productions as indicative of the times? Maybe we live in a culture that hates God more now than they used to in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. When these things were.
There's truth to that.
I think there's truth to that, and that's going to sort of lead into a topic later or a question later. But Heidi says, "Case for Christ. Do you want actors with no relationship with Christ though, just for the acting?" That's a good question. Because a lot of I think. I can't say this with any sort of.
They're actors.
Yeah, like
Heidi, they're actors.
But traditionally in these faith-based films, are you getting people that are in agreement with the message of the film? Like, and is that a what do you call it? Is that a hindrance? Is that a handicap?
Yeah.
To the mission field of.
Well, I think it's the same uproar that someone made the point that. Oh, you should have someone with a real disability playing someone with a disability, and it's just
That's
like,
the culture we
that's
live in.
That's
Yeah.
what acting is. It's pretending to
Yeah.
be someone like it's
But
embodying
Dan,
something.
that's offensive to say.
I know. It's being so offensive. But I think that there's like, for example, Jim Caviezel's journey as playing Christ in Passion of the Christ. I don't think he was a believer before taking on that role, but he wanted to play Jesus, and he emerged from that set with faith. So it could be a tool of introducing actors to the faith in some sense.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because if you have to embody Christ in this role, you have to read the Bible, you have to read the Word, and the Word of God has power.
Yeah. No,
Well,
true.
okay, so if you have to look at the purpose of the film. So the heart of people who want to make these types of film is that they want to use the media as a vehicle to reach people for Christ. That's it's an honorable thing to want to do. Mm-hmm. Then you have to ask the next question: is your use of that media done in an appropriate way, and will it be effective? And the will it be effective part, that's the Holy Spirit's job. Mm-hmm. So you can produce what you're going to produce, but the reality of it is we make it, hear me out, we make it difficult for God in order, although he can work miracles, we make it difficult for God when we produce junk and expect him to bless it and to be effective. And you always have to ask the question when you're looking at something from an evangelism standpoint. Listen, is it more effective to preach the Word of God? Is it more effective to have home Bible studies? Is it more effective to have somebody stand on a street corner on a soapbox?
I'm glad you bring it there, because that's sort of how I view traditional Christian movies and television shows. It has a soapboxy feel, like it. Again, it's trying to bludgeon you in the head with the message of the movie, and sometimes people need a bludgeon, right? Like, and I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place for that, but as a blanket method for ministering to people, I think you have to be more nuanced in your approach, and speak to the.
Well, your movies of old here's your point exactly. Your movies of old that you were highlighting, probably Lucy Brown has more familiarity with. They had a Christian nuance.
This is what Josh says too in the comments.
Yes, they had a Christian nuance wrapped in a dynamic storyline.
Yeah, Josh says art replicates life, products of the times, whereas those movies replicated, they were a product of the time where there was a Christian consensus. We've devolved from that. We've gone astray from the Christian consensus as a culture, and now we're God hating. Quite honestly.
Well, I wonder, so Monty brings up an interesting point I want to go back to.
Yeah.
He was talking about how we go about marketing the film and leaving room for the Holy Spirit. Right. And I think about it like with just the state of the church today and evangelicalism, and how we as the church try to do the same thing in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. We try to attract people. But really, if you think about it, the attractional model of the church belongs to a bygone era. Like this whole, I want people to come to my particular church instead of I want people to be introduced to Christ. And I think it's with the film, sometimes it's I want people to watch my film rather than I want people to be introduced to Christ, because being introduced to Christ has to happen in an organic way. And coming to my church or watching my film or consuming this thing is inorganic in some ways.
Yeah, no, it's just like trying to get people to watch your podcast.
We have a growing audience already now. So he makes Kevin Sorbo makes a second point in the article, one that was alluded to. His suggestion in the article is that atheism within cultural production is a rampant worldview. And he says that unchecked, it's been allowed to flourish, that the church isn't doing enough to combat false truth within the sort of battlefield of media and cultural production, and it's spreading, hateful atheistic ideology and worldview. And then he asked the question, what is the church doing about that? So this is really on point to a book that I'm teaching here at Lather right now. Have you ever read Total Truth by Nancy Pearcey?
Yes, I've read. I didn't read the whole thing, but I've read parts of it. Yeah.
In it, she's talking about the naturalistic worldview, Darwinian worldview, and how it has evolved, and books are written to address all aspects of life from a Darwinian worldview, right? Like books about science and books about sex and books about even down to specifics like women's roles in the workplace, all stemming from a naturalistic worldview. And there's a whole chapter, and she just cites book after book and textbook and books that are taught in colleges and all these things from a naturalistic worldview. And she basically ends the chapter asking so what are we doing in that regard, to combat that? Because this worldview, this false ideology, this faulty worldview, that eventually will lead you to despair if you are consistent within it. It's approaching every aspect of life, and there's books being written about it and this kind of thing. Sorbo's point is hate toward God is rampant within culture, within movies and television. And what is the church doing about that? What are your guys' thoughts from that point that he's making? Like, do you think that it should be taken as a more serious ministry?
Well, I think there's certainly a lot more animosity towards Christianity and biblical worldview than there used to be. One of the things, though, like, I don't know, with atheism, like even calling yourself an atheist is something of a trendy thing.
Yeah.
Especially here in the Pacific Northwest, right?
Sure.
And so, like, there'll be a lot of people. I was in a conversation with a friend about this the other day, and there'll be people who claim they're atheist, and then they're like, "Oh, my house is haunted."
Yeah.
And my buddy's like, "What?
what?
Are you an atheist or are you not?" Like,
Haunted by
if you're an
what?
atheist, you don't believe anything of the supernatural, so you
Yeah.
think it's haunted.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of like confusion. Like, oh, I want to reject the Christian worldview because
Well-
the culture claims that evangelicals are bad, but I
Atheism-
still have some sort of obviously there's some sort of supernatural out there.
Yeah.
So people are searching. They're just searching in other places.
Atheism by nature is paradoxical, right? Like,
Right.
I
Yes.
don't believe in God.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
there is a God. to
That's
believe
true.
in.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah,
for me.
yeah.
What are your thoughts on his second point here? Like,
Well, the Nancy Percy's point was to address the fact that basically taking off of Schaeffer's work that the church lost
Yeah.
this aspect of the battle
A long time ago.
late 1800s,
Yeah.
and never really saw it as a serious issue for the consequence which were extended into the future. So,
Correct.
So part of the problem right now is Christianity, particularly within American culture, but Christianity has an identity crisis and is not well defined. That's the reason, for example, on my program, Truth Time with Pastor Monty, I do not use the term Christian in order to describe those people that associate themselves with Christ. I refuse to, because the term Christianity has become so watered down and so conflicted that it's deceptive, and therefore the different beliefs that are associated with the term Christian are also watered down and confusing for people. That's why I use the term disciple of Christ. If you're a disciple of Christ, that means that you're following the teachings of Jesus Christ. You're not adhering to, say, Roman Catholicism, which says that it represents Christianity, which it clearly does not from a biblical standpoint. That's the reason why here at Aletheia, for example, we're very careful to present what Christianity is from a scriptural standpoint, and our teachings are directed towards doing that. And you basically have to do that. From my observation, there is not one single church that you can point to within American culture and say that church represents what Christianity should be for the entire nation. Because in this culture, you can't do that.
yeah.
And that's representative of a problem. And that's the reason why, as we come closer to the advent of Christ, there's going to be a huge apostasy, because you have a ton of people who claim to be something they're not, or do not understand what they claim to be.
Yeah, Josh in the comments says that we outsource the church's responsibility to inform silos of culture to professionals now.
Yeah.
The church now only talks about church things, and we've relegated ourselves. And yeah, that's what your point is. That's what
Yeah.
Piercy's point is, that we've relegated ourselves. She borrows on Schaeffer's two-story model, lower story and upper story. Lower stories being objectable, science, facts, these kinds of things. Upper story being values, which have no place on the lower story. And Christianity has relegated itself to staying upstairs instead of allowing the biblical worldview to speak to the whole of everything. The point of Kevin Sorbo exactly is that, you have this rampant worldview within culture, and how can we get out of that? How can we speak meaningfully in all these different ways? Because, hey, this other ideology is just running the field here, and what are we doing about that? Like, how can we get a seat back at the table in that regard? I believe him to be saying that, or challenging the church's trying to get the power back, basically, so it can speak into culture. And that's what Percy's saying. That's what Pastor Monty's saying. Do you have additional thoughts on that? We have another comment, but do you have?
Well, I think I agree. I stay away from the word Christian too, especially when referring to my people from the pulpit, for example.
Right.
I say followers of Jesus, which is another way of saying
Same
disciples
thing.
of Christ. Yeah, exactly. Because I think that Christian itself is a term that brings a lot of different ideas and brings a lot of different sort of ideologies to the table. And so saying follower of Jesus is a little more concise way of actually representing what you mean.
That's interesting too, just thinking about it, because even non-believers, they don't necessarily knock Jesus the person, and even non-believers historically recognize that this man existed, and he is good, so it's a subtle way of I don't know what to say, subtle way of just bridging a gap, I guess. Even like you're saying it in regards to your congregants, right? But even if a non-believing person is listening, maybe their wall isn't thrown up automatically, in vocabulary, in language or whatever. But Lucy says Sorbo's observation is insightful. God's word and message should transcend culture and worldview, and agree.
Yeah, yes, to a degree, and I can understand where Kevin is coming from, but that would be the same way. That would be the same way as a radio host on KBDQ, complaining because people are not
What's
being.
What is that?
It's the Christian radio station here in Portland.
Okay.
It's
complaining because
their program is not well received, or it's watered down by the station. If you listen to local Christian radio, you'll find that there are all kinds of biblical errors in the programming that they allow to be produced, which is one of the reasons why I don't spend a lot of time there. There are quality programs, but you have to be careful. So I guess what I'm saying is that I understand what Kevin's saying, but please keep in mind that he's tooting his own horn. He's basically saying, I want this to be more effective, and now he wants to lay responsibility for it to be more effective somehow because the church isn't involved in that particular media. But the reality of it is the church isn't involved because of the reasons that I've already stated. The church has difficulty understanding that, as I said, if you're going to operate in the world, you have to understand the standards that are set there, and understand it well enough to allow it to be a useful tool without allowing it to suck you in. And that's the reason why there are very few good Christian businessmen, because the draw of being in business and being successful is based upon wealth and greed.
I think there should be a point made, as I'm thinking about it, that though we don't have a lot of good, overtly Christian media, movies or television. You mentioned a couple at the top of the show that went under the radar that they are good. They are good production and good acting and good writing and a worthwhile message, that is maybe a little bit of a different angle in terms of faith. I think the point should be made that most movies that we would deem to have a good message, morally good or whatever, they are Christian in nature, and that's why we see them that way. That's why we see them as good. And we use this example in church a couple times when Captain America in the first Captain America movie, right? When he jumps on the grenade as a scrawny, pathetic little kid or little guy, and everyone else runs away, but he jumps on the grenade. There's a reason why that resonates, right? So though it's not marketed, advertised, there's not a press tour talking about this faith-based film, Captain America. There's a reason why when Captain America jumps on a grenade, it gives us goosebumps, like it resonates with our heart because it says something about Christ, So though it's not overtly Christian in nature, like that is what most of the movies that we would walk away from feeling good about, like in our heart, and in our mind, there's a reason for that, is because there is something that's intrinsic in that movie that touches who we're made in the image of, So I think that point should be made. How you bridge the gap and, make it more clearly defined and connect people, with that, heart prime, that image that they're created in, the reason why they resonate with this morality in this movie or that movie, and the reason on the opposite they view that evil as evil, is because of the Christian, the biblical worldview, So I just feel like that point should be made. Maybe Kevin should remember that, or
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, okay, thanks. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of Christian typologies in film, because the
Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah,
like
still like the biblical worldview is still ingrained somewhat in our culture, and we, the sacrifice of Christ is very attractive. That sort of laying down your life for your friends. That is something that we still see as.
Unconditional love and all these things that we would view as the highest levels of good are all things that resonate because of Christ, right? Like, so it's not missing. It's just there's a disconnect for all the reasons that have been mentioned, and people, and the reason why people recognize that is because truth resonates, and you can push it down, but the bubbles of truth just come up, and we talk about that around here, but. You were going to say something real quick.
Well, I was just going to point out that the real. So going back to the what is on the table, the real issue is that the question has to be asked when you're looking at a script and trying to determine whether you're going to make that script into a screenplay and then subsequently a movie is what's the target? Who's the target audience? And if your target is to somehow use this film for evangelistic purposes, then your target is not believers. Your target is a non-believing world. And the difficulty that you're going to have as a scriptwriter is that the non-believing world likes blood and guts and drama and kicking ass, and the church has difficulty with that.
Hey, I got no problem with kicking butt too.
Well, okay, so but so if you're making a movie and and your target audience is you want the film to be used by God, in that fashion, then you have to craft the message of Christ wrapped in this venue that is going to be acceptable to the non-believing world, at least to draw them in, and then allow the script to be able then to work itself out, and that's the reason why you have things, for example, like Ben-Hur, who was that is, if you watch it, it was blood and guts, or the drama that was there in the Ten Commandments, or you have movies. So all I'm saying is that I think that there are those inside of the Christian world who have difficulty understanding the point of what it is that they're trying to do, and that's very hard. It's very hard to take and be true to the message of Christ and yet use a vehicle that is seems diametrically opposed.
Well, you can't read the Bible from cover to cover without getting a lot of blood and guts.
Yeah,
True.
I mean, that's present in the biblical narrative.
absolutely.
Because human life is messy.
Yeah.
you know?
Right, but now we're we're more holy and we're more righteous, so we don't.
It's
we
Christian virtue signal.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So that's
This is actually a really good segue to. This is actually a really good segue, but I first want to read the comment. The truth is that the church should be setting the standard for excellence in production. Instead, we follow behind those secular efforts that have perfected the industry for their own lusts, like the porn industry. We're always behind the curve. We gave our lead up in the Enlightenment. This is what Josh says. So again, like we're reactionary.
yeah. I agree with Josh. I'm and I'm okay for trying to figure out some type of way to include some kick ass and blood and guts, but we're going to stop there. We're not going to go towards porn.
Yeah.
We're just
So I mentioned that there was another actor that was sort of orbiting around the same general topic in terms of the church's output and involvement in movies and television. So in our current our current conversation in regards to what people are attracted to lends to right into what he's saying. But I don't know his name off the top of my head. He's a character actor. He was briefly in Breaking Bad. He's in a new faith-based show called Vindication, I think it is. I don't know anything about that show.
So
really.
what pronoun do we use in trying to talk
Oh, we're not
about
going to
them?
go there. But in the article, the suggestion is that we live in a culture who is pumping out content that seems to be getting increasingly darker in theme. The depravity of man depicted at an increasingly gratuitous level. And the actor in focus suggests that there's a need for believers to counter the cultural output with content that is more positive, quote unquote. Initial thoughts on that general sort of position he's taking.
Well, the actor's name is Todd Terry.
Yes.
Yes.
Do you know the show he's in? His Vindication show?
No, I haven't seen the show.
You read the article, yeah.
Yeah, I read the article because you sent it to me.
Right.
One of the things that I think about that is, I think there are darker things. I mean, clearly, if I don't watch TV a whole lot myself, I'll usually just go for a movie or sports. But there's a lot of stuff on TV that would not have been on TV when I was a kid. I mean, obviously, our level of censorship has exponentially decreased in recent years, and
Increased in different ways.
yeah, exactly. Increased in different ways. Yeah. Different topic, though, right?
Yeah, different topic, different time, not for here.
But yeah, I mean, I think that with the increased secularization of our culture and the increase of that, and the animosity towards biblical worldview and that sort of thing, there's kind of almost a reactionary thing. Like, okay, now that we're free of the confines of the biblical worldview, let's get as much as we can out there on the screen, and as much as much that is titillating as possible, because titillation gets people back. It creates in them that sort of dopamine release, and they want more of that. And so that's kind of what I perceive is going on in television. It's something where they're portraying these things not only to titillate people and to kind of appeal to their baser senses, but there's also this desire to inject into the broader culture a new morality, if you will.
What do you mean by that?
Sort of new, sort of prevalent, like, okay, this is okay. This sort of relationship okay. This sort of, sexuality
you
is
name it,
okay.
you name it. Yeah. It's interesting too. Like, why do you suppose we're fascinated by the gratuitous details, as you were just talking about, as you were talking about, like, the Bible doesn't talk about sin in gratuitous detail, like, ever, right? It leaves it pretty broad in nature. Like, I would say, like Romans 1, it doesn't give details of what the people in Romans 1 are doing. It says they do vile and degrading things. But in movies and television, I mean, do you disagree?
Yeah, I definitely do.
Go ahead.
Like, I think that there's a lot of gritty detail. It's just in language that makes it hard to pick it up. But I think, like, if you go to the Old Testament, you have situations where you have the sibling the sibling issue with David. Their names aren't coming to me, but there's Amnon.
Okay.
Basically takes sexual advantage of his sister,
Right.
and then there's a whole tension then that's created with Absalom,
Right.
and that creates that entire conflict,
Right, because
and,
David didn't deal with it.
exactly, because David just swept it under the rug.
Okay.
So there's some gritty details there. There's Judah and Tamar. There's a lot of different stories in the Bible that don't spare us some of the details. But I mean, maybe you're talking about different details.
I mean, I guess maybe it's a semantics issue. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I hear your point.
Yeah.
But I guess to my question, like, why are people fascinated with what is it about the titillation? Like, what does it say about us? You know, what conclusion would you draw there in regards to that? Why do we want to see? I mean, we're talking about it in our sermon arc right now, and we'll talk about it with horror in specific, like tomorrow. Like, what is it about horror and the details that are encapsulated in that? What is it about violence? What is it about sex and gratuitous detail that what does it say about us?
Well, so media, there are two things going on. First of all, at one point, media was a reflection of culture, and subsequently, within the last 50 years, there's been a concentrated effort by producers and directors to use media as a vehicle to change culture. And so what we see taking place now is this switch that has taken place, that there's a concentrated effort to try to get the cultural changes that we see taking place accepted on a wider basis. In my way of thinking, the church gave up that issue a long time ago. I can only think of a handful of programs where they try to balance the nuances of what's happening in the culture with a Christian or a moral framework. For example, the sitcom Blue Bloods, where they sit down at the dinner table every week, and they have all the families gather around, and they discuss the current issues of their work as police officers and those involved in the justice system.
Wait,
and
Blue Bloods isn't a sitcom.
It's not a sitcom. It's it's a dramatic presentation. Right. But
Procedural cop drama.
But I can only think of a couple of things where that's the point of how things are done. And I think that the difficulty is that I'm not see it comes back to money and what is being produced on at the network level and even in movies has to generate income, and if it doesn't generate income, it's out.
Yeah.
And so how the church responds to that is, I think exactly the way that Aletheia is trying to address it, by saying to the body of believers here that you have the best that you can do is you have an opportunity before you to familiarize yourself with these various programs and with the issues which are present, so that when you're sitting with friends and you're sitting with family and you're sitting with acquaintances and these types of issues come up, you're knowledgeable enough about what is they're trying to transform in the culture, and you're knowledgeable enough from the Word of God to be able to have an intelligent discussion and point out that this is not where God's Word is at, and all this drama that they try to present doesn't have to be if you're a disciple of Christ, because people don't want the drama. People don't want the drama in their lives, but so much of what people go through most people find life mundane. And the drama represents something how to deal with the mundane.
Yeah, there's one of the articles I was reading in preparation for last week's sermon also had to do with comedy in specific, addressing people's despair with their mundane life, and the irony that is involved in a mundane life. Well, there's no such thing as a mundane life in the context of God and your relationship with God, but people who don't know that, experience that, they view comedy as a way to cope with their mundaneness, and so it's out of context. It's out of it's from a negative standpoint.
Well, and we were talking about this last group in the subgroup. What I was pointing out is that in order to be a successful standout comic, you have to be able to work in irony.
Yeah.
And what draws people in is the fact that you are presenting something in such a way that your audience is drawn in because they themselves experience that, and they are beginning to laugh at the nonsense, the irony, which represents, and so that's but the church can definitely use these issues as a tool for everyday conversation in order to inject the truth of the Word of God into the lives of people. But that can't be done on a mass media scale. It must be done on a one-by-one conversational basis.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's about like what you were talking about with the stand-up comedians and that practice, tapping into that irony. It's really at the basic level about story.
Yeah, yes.
And people want to hear others' stories. And I think that's a lot of what we're missing today when we think about like I don't know, like what Sorbo was saying. Like there's a story that's crafted in this film, sure. But really, people want to hear the real stories of people, of individuals, of people they're in relationship with. Yeah. And I think that's really the key. And you're exactly right. One-on-one is the most powerful means for doing so.
Yes.
Yeah. In response to this Tom Terry is his name?
Todd Terry.
Todd Terry.
I believe,
Josh says, because the guy suggests that, the church needs to output more positive, and the actor doesn't really describe what that means other than to maybe suggest it's it doesn't mean gratuitous anything.
Right.
But Josh says, not more positive, that has no meaning. What is positive? More hopeful in a meaningful way, showing that radical change is imminent in a relationship with the real God at the least and Christ at its fullest. Because the actor suggests more positive, but that's subjective and meaningless, right?
Well, okay, so when I think of positive, I think that is a subjective term. I was just thinking, so my girls have recently gotten them into Little House on the Prairie, that old show. Yeah, nice. It was something that I watched as a kid, but it's amazing how there's faith intertwined therein, but it also connects them to the struggles of early settlers. It also separates them from the consumeristic nature of our current culture. Right. Like, for example, there's one scene where Mary and Laura Ingalls each get their own cup for Christmas, their own tin cup. And they're like so excited, oh, my own tin cup. And I think about like, what are kids excited about? Oh, PS4, great, thanks. That sort of thing. And for my girls, that was significant.
I remember those days.
A kid's birthday party is the most.
I got my first cup.
A kid's birthday party is one of the most infuriating things because you put all this thought into a great gift for the kid. Well, if you're treating the relationship right, you put thought into what you're getting the kid and not just going to Fred Meyer and picking the easiest thing on the shelf or whatever. But you put thought into the gift, and the kid opens it and looks, and then they go like this, and they move on to the next one. To your point.
I mean, when there's a stack of 40 gifts on the table, what are you gonna do?
It's maddening. I hate it. It's like, and there's no justice. There's no justice at a kid's birthday party. Agreed?
Yes. Ultimately, my issue with this guy is that he's shifting responsibility. It's like back in the day when I actually held down a job. if
He's
people
retired.
Okay.
if people would come to me and they would say, I got a problem, and then they say what their problem is, and then because my next question to them is going to be, you got any solutions to that problem? Okay, so I hear what you're saying, but what's your input? How can you improve on what can you do? And 9 times out of 10, they don't got nothing. And that's the same way with this guy. It's a shift of responsibility. The church should do this. That there is bovine excrement. The church
That's a thing.
is
He's
not.
trying to make it a thing.
The church the church's responsibility is to mature the body of Christ. That's the church's responsibility. Now, inside of that, God lifts up people with the gift of evangelism. And people are brought into the church by the changed lives of the participants and by those who have the gift of sending out God's message saying, come. But it is the responsibility of the church to mature believers. Not all this other nonsense.
Yeah, to make disciples who make disciples.
That's correct.
We have 4 minutes. Let's see if we can address this.
Boy, this goes quick.
Let's see if we can address this in 4 minutes. I'll try to be as quick as possible on my end. Okay, so Disney, once again in the headlines for its, wokeness and pandering. They released there's a whole thing within Marvel Comics, Star Wars being a part of Disney. It's a whole thing. In the Star Wars comics, they did a sweeping thing where they made all these characters as officially part of the LGBTQ plus community. Many of them obscure characters that you probably never heard of. And then they made Lando Calrissian officially, what did they say? Pansexual or he's part of the LGBT community.
He did always seem androgynous to me.
In the Solo movie, the writer of the movie Solo basically said, "Yeah, I believe, or I wrote him to be pansexual." And there's not much in the movie that really gives to that.
When they wrote that character, that term wasn't even around.
Exactly.
But he named the guy Lando.
That's true.
I always thought that was a cool name, for the record. Lando Calrissian. Anyways, they recently officially said, okay, this character Lando Calrissian is part of the LGBT community, and then there's of course support of it, but then there's also feedback of it. The question at hand is less about the fact that they did it and more about a comment that I saw within the article. And a couple of the comments say it just seems like they are adding it now. It wasn't the original intention with him, and if he was originally pansexual, how could he resist Solo, for example, his best friend? That's a fair question, because he seemed to only be interested in Leia in the movies. And then some noted that Calrissian had a wife in the Star Wars novels. And then the last comment that I want to hone in on: I'll never understand the constant changing of already existing characters to pander and suit agendas. One person wrote, "What's so hard about just making up a new character that represents your ideas?" Why do you suppose, this is quickly, got a couple minutes, why do you suppose they retrofit these ideologies on pre-existing characters? Is there a specific tactic involved, do you think, in that? Or is it trying to pervade something deeper? Why don't they just make a new character in the Star Wars universe? What is it about trying to retrofit ideology on the old characters? They turn Maleficent into misunderstood rather than just evil, as we constantly bring up on here. Lando Calrissian, he's always been whatever, terms that haven't even been around in the culture when it was made. Why do you think that there's something deeper in that, a deeper sort of tactic, a more nefarious thing at play when you are trying to retrofit sinful whatever onto these culturally, hugely culturally significant characters? Or do you think it's just an easy way to pander to the cultural norm?
You want us to address that in 2 minutes?
I want you to try. Have you thought about it before?
Well, I think the
retrofitting
people already love him, right?
Okay.
And so if he is a member of that, community, right, then you know, oh, I've been loving someone who's this character who's been pansexual, you know,
it
all this
normalizes
time.
it or
Yeah, so it normalizes it in some sense, perhaps. I don't know.
The rewriting of the characters is not for those who grew up with the character. The rewriting of the character is for those
The new
who
audience.
are discovering
Yeah.
the character. And so you have the
Well, and that's
the
probably why
familiar-
this guy is all offended, because he's like, hey, this is not who he is. He grew up with the character.
That's exactly right. And so you have that nuance, and I would just say that it's for that purpose, and also the writers are lazy.
I like that one. They're just lazy. They don't want to write new material. It's much easier just to say, hey, he was this. Duh. All right. You can think about that more on your own time. Folks, we're up for time today, so thank you to Dan for coming by and being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, of course, to Pastor Monty, and we'll see you guys in a couple weeks on the next episode.
The views presented in this program are not meant to express the specific views of the Lafayette Bible Fellowship.